Everyday Samurai, Episode 22. Greetings, friends, and welcome to Everyday Samurai. In service to your liberty and the security of a free state. Very glad to have you with us today. I hope you're doing well and certainly appreciate you being here. Appreciate you also for sharing the show and inviting others to hear the message. Someone you think that might benefit or resonate with the ideas of taking the hard-learned lessons of Japan's ancient warriors into modern life in hopes of creating a better world with more security and a private property social order. That's right, just training alone isn't enough. There needs to be a conscious momentum of a growing constituent of people that are demanding their right to life, liberty, and dignity, and then also providing that for each other. This is about community. And certainly, politics is downstream of culture, and a culture that demands these principles be put into practice in terms of government, in terms of economics, in terms of how people live peaceably with one another, will certainly be reflected in those institutions that bring it forth. So think of these things, and every time you train, as being opportunities to create the world in which people can flourish and thrive because of your choice to be a warrior protector. That's what it's all about. And today's episode will be much less structured, a lot less scripted, a lot more spontaneous because it's an important idea about the dangers in everyday life that we face. But they certainly can be overcome. And that's what your training on an individual level creates for yourself, but also creates greater benefit for those around you. So train with sincerity, knowing and keeping in mind that there are benefits not only for yourself, but for the community that you serve. Whether that be in an official capacity or simply on your own. In either case, at least for Americans, each one of us compose we the people, and we are obligated through that contract that we call the Constitution to be ready to execute the laws, to suppress insurrections and repel invasions. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about a disturbing incident that came out of the news recently. But first, I also want to proudly announce some new logo gear that is available on shop.everydaysamurai.life. It includes our redesigned logo, but also one of my favorite quotes from Miyamoto Musashi, one of Japan's most famous swordsmen, and his Book of Five Rings. It comes from the Water Scroll, and it reminds you to take these principles into your daily life. The quote is, "One must make his everyday walk the warrior's walk." This simple phrase is enough to remind you that there are dangers afoot, and that you must build these principles into your everyday state of being, whether that be in your mindset, the way that you walk, the way that you carry yourself, where you sit in a restaurant, always being mindful of who might be watching you or approaching you from the rear. It's not paranoia, but it's a sense of awareness. It's a sense of remembering that everyone has a duty to protect themselves, their lives, and their liberties, and then also provide that same security to those around them. That's what being a warrior is about. And having that situational awareness is what we're going to talk about today, because just recently there was a very disturbing situation where a homeless man pushed another individual off of a sidewalk and into the road as a large truck was passing by. The individual wound up under the wheels of that truck, fortunately surviving. However, the fact that he was walking oblivious to the potential danger seems to be quite disturbing, and unfortunately so many people are in ungulate mode, meaning they're a prey animal rather than a hunter. Having their eyes down or simply away in their own thoughts as they walk leaves the door open to predation and those that would prey upon others. These are exactly the types of things that the prepared warrior needs to be aware of and always be conscious of and always ready to respond. The story comes out of Los Angeles. Why is it that it seems as though so many crazy things are occurring in Los Angeles? But then again, even in Japan, a relatively safe country, we do hear of spontaneous attacks taking place in situations like even when merely waiting for a train to arrive. But in this case, it was December 6th, and reading from a story issued on December 7th, prosecutors filed attempted murder, assault, and theft charges Friday against a homeless man they say pushed another man in front of an oncoming truck, and also attacked two women in three separate and seemingly random attacks in downtown Los Angeles this week. Garrett Joseph Bolt, 31, pleaded not guilty to the charges of attempted premeditated murder, 3 counts of assault by means likely to produce bodily injury, and 1 count of petty theft, the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office said in a written statement. A surveillance camera was rolling when he suddenly pushed another man in front of a truck on Wednesday, at West 6th Street near South Broadway, officials said. The victim ended up pinned beneath the truck and was critically injured. The attacker can be seen stopping to pick up an item from the sidewalk before casually strolling away. Investigators determined the item was a bracelet the victim had been carrying but dropped when he was shoved into the street, according to the district attorney's office. Investigators have since learned that Bolt was responsible for 2 other random attacks targeting women in the same area. He tackled a woman to the ground for no apparent reason, and prosecutors allege Bolt punched another woman on Wednesday afternoon, shortly after pushing the man in front of the truck. Police found and arrested Bolt just after the final assault, authorities said. The attacks appeared to be random and unprovoked. Bolt could face a sentence of life imprisonment if it convicted as charged. And I'll include a video that was embedded in the news report within the show notes, so check them out at everydaysamurai.live/22. When you watch the video, it's very telling that the gentleman who was the victim of this spontaneous assault was quite oblivious to his surroundings. Bolt was wearing a lime green jacket, very bright and very conspicuous, and he was sitting on a bench waiting at a bus stop. And the gentleman was walking down the street. Bolt got up. You could see him raise his shoulders and approach directly to the side of the man. And all the pre-attack signals, for anybody who is aware, were already present. Bolt got up quickly in a start, approached the man, and even though his hands were in his pockets, he raised them up as though it was a football block, and then pushed the man very hard, knocking him over all the way into the street, which was a matter of 4 feet at least. And it's good that he's being prosecuted, but let's face it, the damage is already done. One cannot live with dignity when being pushed, shoved, assaulted, and thrown under a moving vehicle. It is only by the rapid reflexes of that driver that the truck didn't fully roll over him and crush his skull. But these kinds of things happen. And like the story says, it might be a random act of violence, but we only have one life to live. We cannot allow those that would engage in antisocial behavior to get away with this sort of nonsense. That is the function of the warrior. It creates a block against this type of behavior in society. This is social hygiene. Similarly, failing to act allowed Bolt to go on and continue his assault against 2 women. That's exactly what everyday warriors are supposed to prevent. Again, it's not just about self-defense. Of course, self-defense is a component, but more importantly, by taking action to secure yourself and your environment, you are also preventing further assault to those in your community. Let this become the real definition of social justice. Society has a means of correcting these types of behaviors, and it requires full participation of individuals within a society. So not only do we have to recognize that these types of threats exist in our everyday lives and our need to be ready to face them for our own sakes, we also have to recognize that those that are less capable will become prey to these types of depraved individuals. So everyone has an obligation and a duty to be ready. These types of football-type tackles and shoves and blocks and grabs are very common in criminal assaults. This is why training for the UFC or any type of other sportive type event, while it's excellent training and good for fitness, it's not necessarily the reality that deals with combat in the arena of life and death. Watching this most recent video also reminded me of something I saw when I was going through the police academy. And it's the murder of Daryl Lunsford, who was a police constable in Texas. He was taken down also from a football-style tackle, and it ended in tragedy. Daryl Lunsford lost his life. And going through the police academy way back in 1996, they used this video again reminding us that it wasn't about highlighting the tragedy or trying to say that what Daryl Lunsford did was wrong, but to also remind us of the reality of situations that we're dealing with, and to learn, to recognize what went right and what went wrong. Obviously, it ended terribly and tragically, and there are things that we can learn by watching the video. So I'll take this simply from the Wikipedia page, and I'll include that also in the show notes. The scenario unfolds as thus. In the early hours of the morning of Wednesday, January 23rd, 1991, at approximately 1:20 a.m., Constable Daryl Lunsford spotted a suspicious vehicle traveling on U.S. Highway 59 through the town of Garrison, a 1981 Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme with Maine license plates. Lunsford pulled the vehicle over and turned on his dashboard camera to record the traffic stop. He then got out of his cruiser and approached the vehicle. Inside the vehicle were 3 men: Valdemar Villarreal, his younger half-brother Reynaldo Villarreal, and their accomplice, Jesus Cortez Zambrano. Lunsford questioned the driver, Reynaldo, and asked whether he had any identification on him, to which Reynaldo replied no. He claimed that he had a driver's license but did not have it on him. He also said that he was helping his brother Baldemar drive the car. Unbeknownst to Lunsford, the three men had loaded the car with 31 pounds of marijuana and were driving from Houston to Chicago, where they planned to sell it all. At 1:27 a.m., Lunsford asked to look in the trunk of the vehicle, and the men reluctantly agreed. Lunsford and Reynaldo opened the trunk, and Lunsford could immediately smell the scent of marijuana. At 1:28 a.m., Baldemar, despite being told not to, got out of the vehicle and stood with Reynaldo speaking to Lunsford. Suddenly, Baldemar grabbed Lunsford by his legs while Reynaldo grabbed him from behind, carrying out a prison takedown on Lunsford as they forced him onto the ground by the side of the car. Zambrano then got out to assist his two partners in crime, and the three men proceeded to beat and kick Lunsford while he was pinned down on the ground. They rolled him over onto his stomach, kicked him in the hip 3 times, stabbed him repeatedly with a knife, and then grabbed his own handgun. Baldemar shot Lunsford in the neck with the handgun, severing his spinal cord and instantly killing him. Moments afterward, the suspects moved Lunsford's body into a nearby ditch. The 3 suspects then made a getaway in their vehicle, leaving behind Lunsford's body and his police cruiser. Now again, watching the video, and it's available on YouTube, and I'm including a link in the show notes, it reveals a couple of things. Number one, Lunsford had his flashlight in his left hand and handcuffs in his right. At the time when the takedown was initiated, you could see that the two had been communicating with each other, just as the one was about to make the tackle. Since his hands were full, and apparently Lunsford, from what I understand, got the job because he was a big guy. He was popular as a football star when he was in high school, yet didn't actually go through any serious training in order to get the constable's job. The Wikipedia page even says that in addition to being the Precinct 3 constable for Nacogdoches County, he also ran his own auto repair shop and parts store in Garrison. This being in mind, he immediately went into grapple mode. As soon as the one went for a tackle, he put his arm around the man. And then when the other one went high, he tried to grab the other one as well. So he was trying to get both of them in individual headlocks. And of course, this did not work very well. He wound up going to the ground, and from there, the third one jumped out just as what was described on the Wikipedia page. And from there, it was pretty much all over. The good news about this story, though, is the fact that seeing the video changed law enforcement training. And indeed, another state trooper from Texas, a guy by the name of Andy Lopez, having seen that video, changed his tactics one night later in September of 1991, dealing with 3 individuals on a interdiction stop on Highway 77 with a similar scenario to what happened to Lunsford. Fortunately for Lopez, he was able to get out of it successfully. Now, we can talk about the good and bad of conducting drug interdiction. As someone who got into law enforcement solely to get involved in the war on drugs because of my naivety, I have come since to realize that the war on drugs is indeed a scam, incompatible with a private property-based social order. Government is supposed to protect people and their property, not confiscate and destroy it. And we can talk about the implications and ramifications of that at a later time. But from a tactics point of view, not only do you need to recognize the signs of when someone is going to engage in some sort of offensive behavior, but also to have the right tactics. Instead of going into grappling mode, you need to have the idea of cutting down your opponent. Just like the famed swordsman Miyamoto Musashi talks about, it doesn't matter if you adopt the high guard or the low guard, the left stance or the right stance. What matters in combat is that you cut down your opponent. This reminds me also of the movie Spartan, which is kind of a strange movie, but knowing that one of the technical advisors was a former Delta Force Command Sergeant Major lent a lot more credibility to the film and piqued my interest as well. But there's a wonderful scene in there where the main character is introduced to a trainer at one of the special operations facilities, and he asks, "What are you doing here?" And she responds, "I teach knife fighting." And he says, "Nonsense. You train these men to kill. That way, when they run across somebody who's trained in knife fighting, he'll send them straight to hell." The idea here is that we don't want to teach about fighting. We want to teach about winning. Same thing when it comes to police tactics. We don't want to be thinking about winning any type of wrestling matches. We don't want to have the idea of going to the ground with anyone. We want to kill anyone who tries to take us to the ground, because going to the ground in an armed scenario is not an option. In the real world, you have to assume that everyone is, or at least is potentially armed, especially you. If you're an American, it's your duty and obligation to always be armed, ready, and trained to deploy force with tools. In law enforcement training, we have the +1 rule. meaning that if there's a known weapon or a known adversary, you automatically assume that there's another one, a plus one, that you don't see. We take this also as a universal principle from the lessons of political economy, the seen and the unseen, as Frederick Bastiat so eloquently wrote about. These principles are universal for a reason, and in our world, armed combat has lasting ramifications. Even if you survive, it's highly likely that you could be irrevocably injured. This is why you have to always assume that there is a weapon involved, not the least of which is your own. And learning from Daryl Lunsford's case, that weapon can be used against you. This is why samurai-related training systems deal with grabs so much. Any type of grab is limiting your ability to access your weapons. And we also have to recognize that the grab is the first step in a sequence of further attack. Things are very, very different when it's life or death, when weapons are involved, when multiple opponents are involved, when the outcome is uncertain because there's no referee, there's no time limit. The field of battle is uneven and uncertain. New elements can be introduced without forewarning. This is why situational awareness is so important, to recognize the signs before events unfold. And for this reason, I always recommend that you have two things, not only technique, but also situational awareness. You build that first through mindfulness, and the best way to gain mindfulness is by contemplation, by calming the mind, that you get into that state of no mind so that any new stimuli can be recognized instantly. When you're in that state of pure awareness, any new stimuli become very noticeable. This is why we practice Zen, why the samurai were advised to always practice Zen. You can also take advantage of technology, meditation technology that gets you into that Zen state of mind quickly without years of practice like the old days. This is what the Zen 12 program is all about, and I recommend that you look into everydaysamurai.life/Zen12 to learn more about this powerful technology. When you come back from a hard day, whether it be in law enforcement or whatever your occupation might be, learning how to de-stress, how to download whatever is occupying your mind is an essential factor, and you can learn about that and get it done a lot quicker if you leverage technology. So check out everydaysamurai.life/Zen12 today and get yourself into that Zen state of mind. So once you have that situational awareness built up, you need to be able to also recognize those pre-attack clues to know what it looks like when somebody is approaching you with harmful intent. The samurai understood that they could feel in the atmosphere when harmful intent was afoot. They called this saki, and anybody that's familiar with the Bujinkan will understand their fifth dan test involves that sensing of saki from a downward strike and knowing how to avoid a potentially harmful blow. And while this might be done from an angle that is out of view, when we look around and have situational awareness, when we keep our head on a swivel and we are mindful of our surroundings and those around us, we're able to see when people have harmful intent. We can see it in the way that they carry their bodies, the way that they walk, the way that their shoulders are placed. When we watch their hands, we can see when they're reaching for weapons. We can see when they're starting to get tense. And in that way, we can develop the situational awareness where we respond before they have a position of advantage. And it's from that situation that we can then take remedial action. So situational awareness is what gives rise to the ability to apply technique. And again, as these scenarios have indicated to us, grappling against a grappler or grappling against somebody who's grabbing you is a bad op. Rather than trying to simply engage in a wrestling contest, in a real world situation, you have to be able to cut someone down. You cut them down with a strike, you cut them down with your own tool, you cut them down with a throw, something that will allow you to take space and then deploy your weapon. And yes, you should always be armed in some capacity. Even if you're on an airplane, that's why we recommend a tactical pen. And you can get a tactical pen that is specifically designed and curated for defensive measures at shop.everydaysamurai.life. And when you do, you can also get our downloadable tactical pen basics guide. So again, if you don't have a tactical pen that you keep with you at all times, and especially when you travel, then go to shop.everydaysamurai.life. In either case, whether you have time or not to deploy a weapon, and whether you're legally advisable to do so is dependent upon each situation, and we also have to become great students of our legal environment. The samurai had the advantage of having legal privileges. The idea behind everyday samurai is that in this day and age, everyone has the right and ability to own some means to defend themselves, and that's what was enshrined in the U.S. Constitution, particularly in the Second Amendment. It's inherent, not only for yourself to be able to defend your person and your property and your loved ones, but you also have the ability to come together as a community to defend each other, not the least of which from tyrannical government. Quite obviously, the world that we live in is very different from those ideals, not only of the samurai ideal being in service to liberty, but also having a government that even obeys its own operating charter. And as unfortunate as that is, the only way out of it is to build a mass consciousness of people that understand the principles of liberty, that understand what real law is all about. And in that vein, we'll recognize now that there are two types of law: natural law, or scientific law, and then also political law, contrived by politicians and dictated by those in power. To understand the difference between these two, I'm now going to turn to Richard J. Mayberry's book, Whatever Happened to Justice. This comes from Chapter 4, The Two Kinds of Law. Quote, "Throughout history, humans have used two basic kinds of legal systems. One is scientific, and the other political. Americans are no longer taught anything about these two kinds of law. Lawyers are aware of the two kinds, but after they leave law school, they are forced to work almost entirely in the political legal system. Never having much contact with scientific law, they soon forget it and rarely mention it. Many of the America's founders in 1776 and 1787 were lawyers. At that time, lawyers were highly respected. Today, they are viewed with suspicion. Why the change? I'll talk about that later. America's founders took care to ensure that their new country would be founded on the principles of scientific law. To understand the differences between a political legal system and a scientific one, we must know how scientific law developed. We need to start all the way back in the Dark Ages, around 500 AD. 15 centuries ago, the Roman Empire collapsed. Barbarians had overrun Europe and set up feudal governments. These governments were bloodthirsty and brutal, but for the common people they had one good point: they were lazy. They had little interest in the day-to-day affairs of the people. As long as the commoners paid taxes and fought in whatever wars they were ordered to fight in, their new government left them alone. This meant many kingdoms had no government court systems. When two individuals had a dispute, they were left to work it out on their own. We can imagine what happened. Disputes often led to brawls or worse. After several bloody incidents, the commoners would surely begin looking for ways to avoid violence. It's likely that when two individuals had a dispute, their families and friends would gather around and tell them to find some neutral third party to listen to their stories and make a decision. Legal historians tell us the most highly respected and neutral third party in the community was usually a clergyman. The opponents would be brought before this clergyman, and he would listen to both sides of their story. The clergyman would consult moral guidelines such as the Ten Commandments and make a decision. The grapevine would spread this decision throughout the community. It would become a precedent for later decisions. Precedent is very important. The reasoning behind it was simple. The fundamental nature of Homo sapiens doesn't change much. What was right yesterday remains right today. Notice the emphasis on basics, on eternal truths. Humans seem to have a built-in desire for legal systems based on precedent. What parent hasn't heard, "If Johnny can do it, why can't I?" Each family has its own body of law, developed one case at a time. This law can be complex. Every child knows that the specific definitions of such phrases as on time and too late can be very important. Loopholes are sought like gold nuggets. The parents are under continual pressure to hone their rulings so that no misunderstandings are possible. This method of evolving law on a case-by-case basis is called case law. Developed by judges, it was the beginning of scientific law. As decades passed, the precedents were written down and kept in a safe place. Persons who were not too clear about how to handle an unusual business transaction or some other sticky matter could study them to better plan ahead and avoid problems. Eventually, some of the clergymen became so skilled at listening to cases and making sound judgments that they acquired much prestige. Demand for their services grew and they became full-time judges. The body of precedents they produced became the law of common usage, the common law. A key point: common law was based on religious and philosophical principles. This is how it determined right and wrong. What other way is there? In 1897, Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. pointed out, "The law is full of phraseology drawn from morals." The key here is to remember 2 points. First, there are 2 kinds of law, political and scientific. Second, the old law was a scientific legal system that grew out of court decisions, precedents, based on religious principles. In its early years, common law had little connection with government. It was spawned by religions. Close quote. Friends, it's important to remember that the founding of the United States was based upon a pursuit of putting common law into practice in universal terms for everyone. No exceptions for politicians, for anyone. Everyone was going to be on a legal playing field equal to one another. And if you read the Constitution, you understand that it was essential that we the people be armed and ready to carry out those law enforcement functions. That's what Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15 and 16 are all about. And it is essential, indeed necessary to the security of a free state, that we no longer outsource our security to those with political motivations. It is essential that law be restored to scientific principle rather than being under auspices of political control. This is not taking the law into your own hands on an individual basis. John Locke indicated that it is inconvenient and not very credible to be the judge in your own case. So it's natural that we would engage in the division of labor. When it comes to settling disputes, we rely on experts, we rely on professionals, but that does not automatically term it a function of government, a function of bureaucracy, a function of politics. Real law is scientific. It can be discerned through enduring and universal principles. In contrast to the samurai that had special privileges that put the commoners and the peasants and the farmers in subjugation, that is not the type of legal system that we are looking for. We are looking to make everyone a samurai, everyone in service of maintaining scientific law, where people are secure in their persons, their papers, their property, and their effects of every kind. That's what real justice is all about. So friends, we hope you've enjoyed this episode of Everyday Samurai. Be sure to subscribe to our feed and stay up to date with our latest offerings. Remember to like and share. Get the word out. Get more people involved. Get more of this mass consciousness building. Again, I'll remind you that a Tactical Pen Basics Manual is available when you purchase any tactical pen from shop.everydaysamurai.life. You may want to also get on our email subscribers list where we send out updates, and you can do that at everydaysamurai.life. Until next time, stay sharp, stay aware, and be well.